Hi, everybody. This is S.J. Thomason with Truth Matters at Christian-apologist.com. And I am joined by my good friends from all over the country, the United States. I've got Andrew Stratelates, Josh Brister, Craig Reed, and myself. And we are going to address a very powerful question. What happened to New Atheism and why did it die? So New Atheism was the four horsemen of atheists. So that was Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, who else is in there? Richard Dawkins. Sometimes people have added Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens had an untimely passing, unfortunately for him. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali has since decided she is a Christian. And Richard Dawkins, he also thinks that Christianity is a pretty good deal, and he's kind of worried about what the loss of Christianity has done to his country living in the UK. So without further ado, I'm just going to ask each of these guys to introduce themselves and to tell us what they think about New Atheism. Since Josh got here first, I'll go by Josh, then Andrew, then Craig, and welcome everybody.
Well, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. My name is Josh Brister. I've been studying apologetics now for almost 30 years. I've seen the rise and fall of New Atheism. I think it's very much similar to regular atheism. It's just a more forceful, more aggressive type. And I think all of our collective efforts, even if they're so small, we've all had our place of putting the death knell into the New Atheism movement. And I'm really happy to be around here with all you three. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew, you want to go next?
Sure thing. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Stratelates. I'm mostly on Twitter or X, but I have done various apologetics projects and things over the past 10 years. And basically, my perception is that New Atheism was primarily a specific political movement at a specific time, and the political landscape has shifted so significantly that it no longer has the sort of influence or liveness that it once did. My perception is it basically initially started as a way that you could sort of smear Islamists and conservative Republicans with the same brush, and that sort of disappeared after the mid-2010s as a way that the left could operate, and now you end up with a sort of a fracturing of it. Especially with regard to sort of the more Enlightenment or libertarian strain of it, and the more leftist or collectivist strain that you could solve the fracture with, like Atheism Plus and things like that. And the final death of it was, of course, the conversion of, pardon me, I forgot her name.
Ayaan Ali.
Yes.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah. Ayaan Hirsi Ali's conversion to Christianity basically indicated that it was just sort of a temporary political alliance, right, as opposed to a generational force or a progressive force like the founders claimed at one time.
Yeah. Amen. And Craig?
Hi, my name is Craig Reed. You got to let me know if everything comes through clear, because this is new for me streaming out here. I'm outside in Malibu because my wife is home, so we took a walk. But it took me a while to find a signal, so we'll see if I can stay here. But my name is Craig Reed, and I've had a YouTube channel for 8 years, I think. I've been studying New Atheism the whole time, and actually was New Atheism is the reason, it's what put me on the map. It's part of the reason why I started doing it, because I was listening to, I remember walking by, everyone can hear me, right?
Yes.
Sounds okay? Okay, good. Once upon a time, I was walking past the bookstore, like New Atheism was starting to be mainstream. Like I remember at Barnes and Noble, there was a display, and it was like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. I was like, what is this? Like, that's the first exposure to it. And then I started checking it out on YouTube, and there were people like who I actually started listening to last night, who even agrees with us that atheism is dead or new atheism is dead, is the Amazing Atheist. So I started listening to the first round of like, there was people called the Amazing Atheist. There was this guy Thunderfoot, I think his name was. Um, there was a Cult of Dusty was another guy. There was this whole crew. The only one who's still here is Aaron Ra, I think, was part of that original crew. And then there was a girl who you streamed with, Stephanie. What was her name? I want to say B Bonnet, but that's not it. It was like
Shannon Q or
no. Shannon came a little bit later. Paula G is actually relatively recent to atheism, but I'm going back like 8. I think Paula G might have come after me by a year or two. But there was like there was a whole group of people. There was this one girl who was really popular, Jacqueline Glenn, and they were a lot more poppy and like mainstream. And they're gone for the most part. You know, the Amazing Atheist he had broken through to the point where he was sometimes on CNN talking about atheism, and he had something like 1 million subscribers. But you know, most of the atheists around now didn't like him. But he was like really popular, and he was. I was watching his stream last night, and he's the first to tell you how they just sort of disappeared. Like the search engine for atheism is, you know, down like by something like 60-70%. You know, it's just not the same, even in our little local area. You know, when you and I started, it was like us and maybe like 50 atheist channels, and all the atheist channels would grow really quickly. And there've been like last year, I think there were 3 new atheist channels who were in that style, that like aggressive in your face style. There's still atheists, but that new atheist style seems to have like just fallen off the map, right?
which is a good thing. So no, I agree. That's a good thing. It does seem like, I mean, it just seems like it's lighter. And even on X right now, if you go to X, it doesn't seem like when I first got on X and I started getting active in 2016, my account was absolutely bombarded by atheists. And now, you know, there's 2 or 3 or maybe 4. I blocked a handful though, but there's some atheists that just, it's like they're gone. I don't know where they all went.
They're totally gone. You used to have like 100, every time you tweeted, there'd be 100 people lining up to tell you where to go. And it'd be like, most of those people are gone. And some of them have transferred over or are transferring over. They either don't stream anymore or they've shifted gears. Like, you know, Pine Creek has kind of shifted gears towards more conservative Republican stuff. He still does atheist stuff a little, but nowhere near the way it used to be. It's died out.
Yeah, Pine Creek's a good example of why. I think I would say my theory is that it split because there's conservatives and there's liberals, and the liberals went way too far to the left. Like they didn't. I used to consider myself kind of liberal, and now I don't consider I wouldn't at all relate to somebody like AOC or that cracky new elected potential mayor
guy
in
from New York, the mayor of New York. Oh my God,
the worst,
communist,
absolute worst. Yes, I mean seriously, if people don't know history and they would actually put a communist in office in New York, they get what they deserve.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's what happens when you don't study history. You put all these novel ideologies in front of established traditions. We have established traditions. You can read Edmund Burke. Of all these things we have internalized that are logical, that are in our traditions, in our practices. So why I think that new atheism has dispersed is because I think it has awakened the church to give an apologetic response. And
that's true. Definitely.
They have internalized that response and understood or realized or come to the realization that the arguments that the new atheists were presenting, and by extension, the old atheists, weren't very good at all, weren't very persuasive at all. So I think that's why there's been a real mellowing out of the new atheists.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. Go ahead, Craig.
Well, I'll say 2 things. First of all, that mayor guy, he used the phrase globalize the Antifada and he won't walk away from it, which is literally like, kill Jews. It's literally what it means. It's like it was an uprising where it was very similar to October 7th, and he won't down. He's like a Hamas supporter, which is insane. In New York is like the most Jewish city on the planet outside of Israel. But so what he just said is totally true. It's something I've been saying for a long time. The reason why it took root, I think, a huge reason why it got so popular was that they had a huge target audience was fundamentalist Christians. And they had these non-arguments that are geared towards, they win all these debates against like young earth creationists or people who were trying to say the Bible is inerrant. They have this whole series of arguments that are not about ontology. And literally, they don't have any argument. They literally will say like, you're the one making the positive claim. If asked to say like, give me some evidence that God does not exist, they won't, there's no argument for it. And they've been kind of trying to paper over that fact for years. But if they actually had a good argument, it's like the person who put him, who was the best of them was Christopher Hitchens. And he has terrible arguments. He's very good at rhetoric, and he's a good speaker, and he's really talented at being witty and engaging. But he doesn't have any real, arguments. There's no arguments. They're all what I call the sleight of hand school of counter apologetics, where they argue, they win a debate based on something that has nothing to do with whether God exists or not. Like, young earth creationism. Is the earth 6,000 years old? Something like that.
Yeah, or flat earth. I never even realized there were so many people who believed in a flat earth, but these guys are debating people like that. They go for the low-hanging fruit sometimes to make themselves
big time.
Often. Well, they often have scripts. You can see this in the so-called street epistemologists, where you have this popular level atheistic apologetics, and they go after people that aren't trained in philosophy. But once you run into somebody like that's really trained in philosophy, you can see the vacuous of their arguments. So I think that played a real significant role. Also, there's also been this definition game, which Craig Reed hinted at. Try to avert the burden of proof. And I was wondering if any of y'all could talk about that. They would often redefine atheism as merely the lack of belief. And I think,
which is fair enough on a personal level. I mean, that may be, often that is the case. The person just doesn't believe in the God, whatever gods they were raised up in, or church or whatever. But there's no reason why anybody else should accept that, because that's your personal relationship. And that I should only care about that if you've got good evidence for why why I shouldn't believe in God. And they don't. Even like, a really like well-known guy, like I used to point out, what's his name? Rationality Rules. Is a fairly big channel, right? He said he had his big like why I'm an atheist. None of them had anything to do with not believing in God. They were all like, okay, the Bible has contradictions. That may be true, but God can still exist. The Bible has violent scriptures. Okay, may be true. God can still exist. They were all arguments and side points of Christianity. There's no good evidence for the resurrection. That's debatable, but that's still, God could still exist. They're not arguments against, there's no reason for anybody else to go, yes, you're right. Atheism is true. God doesn't exist. They don't have any real arguments. Hiddenness only works if you've experienced it yourself. The hiddenness argument, right?
I think what actually really put the arrow into the bullseye on atheism and killing it is when we look at what happened with the people the men who think they're women and they want to go compete in sports, and the idea to try to take children and cut off their body parts. I mean, I think that grossed out so many people, including the atheists like Richard Dawkins, he was a zoologist, I guess. He was like, this is awful. Why do you when you're so culturally relative, you're morally relative, you have no standard against which to judge anything. And so they also get in that trouble. So they can't say it's wrong because they can't say really anything's wrong morally.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth in that. When I watched most of the atheists who said the death of new atheism had more to do with that, like the split into conservative, like Richard Dawkins, and wokester atheists, and that there was like, there was even something called atheism plus, which I only vaguely know about, where it was like, we're not just atheists, we're feminists, and we're, and just like trend. Also, it's just a trend. Like they trended on to like, transgender stuff. A lot of
Mhm.
them just started streaming about other stuff. And they don't care about
Yeah.
atheism anymore. They just started streaming about like trans rights and things like
Yeah.
that. They're still atheists, but they don't really care about moving it to the needle and promoting it.
Hmm.
Because they also got through the illusion that it was like gonna shake up the world, and atheists were gonna like,
Yeah.
there's gonna be this utopia of rationality that would be produced when everybody deconverted.
Well, Voltaire has been saying that. They've been saying that since the 18th century. They've been
Right.
predicting the death of God, the death of Christianity, and all their predictions have come to the wayside. And this was yet another prediction by loudmouth rhetoricians that lack the philosophical depth. And when we expose that, and I'm talking about us as like a community, all of us, and everybody around, when we did our part in that, that's when it went away. So when we speak truth to power or truth to a misunderstanding or rhetoric, that's what happens.
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, basically, the major thing that a lot of the new atheists ran into, including Ali, but she made the right decision, is a lot of them sort of had the attitude of, well, it's great to be falling past the seventh story when you jump out of the building, but not hitting the floor. So let's just fall past the seventh story eternally, because clearly that's the optimal state. And Ali basically said, no, let's not jump off the building at all, actually, right? And that's what you end up with Dawkins and these others. They want to exist in sort of this um, implicitly theistic and Christian milieu, but aren't willing to go all the way either way, right? And like Dawkins is claiming he's culturally Christian now, but that's sort of like too little too late, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not
Well,
going to do it. And do you think, how many of you think that we're very close? I mean, we're in the end times because of Jesus basically implied this is the generation we're going to see him coming again in the clouds and that kind of thing. And so we're in what I would say is the end times. Do you think the end times would be possibly I mean, we're not supposed to speculate on when because nobody knows when, but do you think we're seeing any signs of, like, for example, massive floods or massive fires or major hurricanes, anything that it might be God sometimes involving the weather a little bit in his maybe disgust with things like people killing their own babies, their unborn children? So just throwing a different question real quick to anyone.
I mean, yeah, it's
um,
possible. We just had the biggest fire in the history of California, like 4 or 5 months ago in January, and it was the whole town next to me got burnt to the ground. Um, it's possible, before I became a Christian, I had this book that I was called Apocalypse Culture, and it was kind of loosely thematically about like how the world is just. It wasn't a Christian book. It was kind of just how crazy the world has gotten. But the premise was, it was kind of like a zombie apocalypse style book. Like the premise being that the world is just so insane that the apocalypse, we're right on the doorstep of the apocalypse, and that's why even if I'm not Christian per se, I can still see that the center cannot hold, as the poem goes. You guys know that poem from the Second Coming. Mere
No, I
anarchy
don't.
is. Oh, that's awesome. That's William Butler Yeats. It's famous. Mere
Hmm.
anarchy is loosed upon the world. Surely a second coming is at hand. Surely some revelation is at hand. And what pale beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? You see it quoted all the time, like slouching towards Bethlehem is the title of a book, and it's sort of loosely about the devil, but it's more metaphorical than it is like I don't think he was a Christian per se. He was kind of like a druid, Celtic or something. So it's more
That's
like
that's exactly
it's
what I
more like
wanted to
the
get
world
into.
is so insane that apocalypse culture makes sense to a lot of people, like punk rockers. And I was sort of on that page when I was into punk rock, because it
Hmm.
looked like apocalypse was coming. It seemed like I was living in apocalypse to some degree. You know what I mean?
But that's what
So
I'm wondering, if you think that some of the change to new atheism and atheism itself is because it's become less attractive than having some sort of spirituality, including things like witchcraft and the occult. And so there has been, as new atheism and atheism are kind of going down, I think the occult is going up. And yeah.
Well, that's basically one of the things you ran into with atheism plus, right? And the in a very real sense, new atheism was a reactive movement, right? It was standing against theism, which to them was evangelical Christians and Muslims, basically. And the thing is there's an infinite number of values you can have to be against those two, right? And so there was no real unity in it, just sort of a grab bag of rhetoric that was effective. And when they
yeah,
did try to,
there's a lot of truth in that.
yeah,
'Cause
and then when they
one of
did,
the things
go ahead, Craig.
one of the things that I pointed out in my videos is that when they talk about a lot of people are deconverting from Christianity, they're not becoming atheists. They're becoming nons, and they're still spiritual, and they're questing for spiritual stuff. And that's like the people who mostly became atheists were fundamentalist Christians. That was the real target audience. Those are the people like, and not all of them though, because there's still people in the fundamentalist Christian churches. It's like they cultivated their harvest of people who were itching to were fed up with fundamentalism for whatever reason, and they became atheists, and they really responded to new atheism. But a lot of other people will deconvert and just be kind of spiritual, like my mom was, checking out ashrams, and they won't necessarily say I don't believe in God. They do believe in God usually, because they've had supernatural experiences that they're unwilling to say didn't occur, or unwilling to rationalize away. They say, I know a lot of them here in California, people who aren't Christian or aren't Catholic anymore, who still believe in God because and they'll tell me stories because they know I'm Christian. They'll say like, yeah, this is the thing that happened. And they'll tell me supernatural stories, you know, whereas atheists might have the same experience, but they write them off completely as, well, there's got to be a naturalistic explanation for that,
Mhm.
when there might not be.
Yeah, I
But
think so
that's,
too. I think that we're seeing, this one, I listened to this one exorcist. I listened to a few exorcists. I know I'm a little crazy, but I listened to this father's Chad Ripperger, and he talks about, he's like, apparently Haiti consecrated, the government of Haiti consecrated itself to witchcraft and the cult, Satan, that type of thing. And the government of Dominican Republic consecrated itself to the Lord Jesus. And if you look at the way that the way that hurricanes have hit that island and the way natural disasters have hit that island, Haiti has been absolutely battered. And he compared that to Dominican Republic has been protected in many ways, which is kind of an interesting thing to think.
well, I
But
know
I
the
do,
story about Haiti. I didn't know that about the Dominican Republic. Haiti's that's famous. The Haiti story. There was like all this voodoo back then.
yeah,
It
it's
probably still
crazy.
is. Actually, there's probably still a lot.
There is a lot. There's still
But
a lot going on, and that's some of the. I'm not saying that everyone, because like for example, Tampa, where I live, was absolutely annihilated by storms, and then I find out it's one of the number one sex trafficking places in the world, and so it just happens. I mean, I could obviously I'm playing the role of saying that maybe God is behind some of these storms, but in the Bible, he was behind some of the storms, and so I see a lot more storms. It's not that I deny climate change. I absolutely believe in climate change. I'm just questioning where it's all coming from.
Yeah, well, the other thing to keep in mind is the denser a city is, the more vice it has. And the denser the city is, the more that it will be impacted by natural disasters, right? So part of this may be sort of that sort of effect as well. Symbolically, right, or metaphysically, it's true we're in the final age and we're going to see things. And the other thing that's also true is each one of us is quite literally on an apocalyptic journey towards death and final judgment, right? And so that's something to keep in mind as well, that it's replayed in reality as well, because it's the truth of each of our lives as well.
Josh, you want to comment?
Jesus said the kingdom of God was at hand. And I think since Jesus rose from the dead, we are in the end times. The end times is ever approaching us, and we don't know when. Now, to give an exact time, that would be mere speculation. But we can see that evil has increased. People are redefining even what a person is, what a woman is, have difficulty defining basic concepts. They flip truth on its head. So I think evil is a presence. It's growing more, but again, goodness is growing more. I think our witness. I think we need to keep evangelizing. I think this relates to atheism, in that the atheist, they abandoned God, but they placed their faith in other gods. That's why I believe that there is a rise in this Satanism, or this cultic worship, or this ideologies where they worship politics over anything else. So I do think people have these God substitutes, and this is what atheists are doing. I've always said this before. Atheists live in 1,000 different ways as if Christianity were true. And this is exemplified in what Richard Dawkins said. He admits he's a cultural Christian. Most atheists are cultural Christians, and they live as if Christianity were true, but they live inconsistently by their rhetoric, in denying Christ, in denying basic fundamental truths that have been shaped by a broadly conceived Christian notion of reality.
Well,
So
that's
I
the
do
other.
think, I just wanted to sum up. I do think that we can't get rid of God. I think they are placing their hope in a God substitute. And I really, at the end of the day, I think atheism leads to polytheism, or the worship of nature, or the worship of the state, or of the individual, rather than what worship should be placed in God himself.
So I was going to say the other part of the new atheist dying out is that, when you mentioned that even Richard Dawkins is a cultural Christian now. When I was talking about that Jordan Peterson stream, there's two types of apologetics. There's a type of it's all apologetics means is defense of the faith, defense of Christianity. There's defending the faith because I'm trying to convince you that God exists, and there's also defending Christianity on cultural grounds. And the original new atheists were, they said things like religion poisons everything, religion is a mind virus, religion is irrational stuff for kooks, and that premise has been completely decimated just through argumentation and the evidence. So most atheists recognize that there's actual, if Richard Dawkins himself is a cultural Christian and recognizes that there's value to Christianity as a cultural force, and you don't want to get rid of it because it's actually a unifying, good, positive, structural, half the work of defending Christianity is done. Apologetics is done, because one of the ways that you defend it is, it's socially useful, it's beneficial to people. And I think we pretty much won that side of the arguments. When
Yeah.
Stephanie and I first started doing this, there were a lot of debates about, even one of the first debates I got into was with Holy Kool-Aid, is religion positive for society or something like that. You don't see those debates anymore because most of the atheists readily acknowledge that the evidence shows that, religion is beneficial to society. So they've given up that argument. And that was a big part of New Atheists. Sam Harris's premise, and they used to say, like, Christianity is irrational, destructive nonsense for fools. And that's just obviously not true. So big part of the premise has been, debunked, basically. I can't even think of anybody there's still a couple of like people on Twitter. I think they're still there, maybe Godless Liz and who say Christians don't know anything about science and they're so dumb. But I don't think there's even that many atheists who still are on that page anymore. That was a huge chunk of new atheism, and that's been basically debunked because at least the atheists, seceded to the arguments on that one. To the evidence.
It's a tacit admission, because when we show that they live as if Christianity were true, and this has been expressed by Rodney Stark and Jordan Peterson, among others, then it shows that, you're just talking, you atheists. You already believe in Christianity. You're just talking out of your mouth. So it really, I think, really has shown the weakness of atheism, as you said, Craig.
I want to point out something that I have Alexis Corral saying here about Karl Marx and how Marxism and communism is very much atheism as well. I mean, any person who fully embraces Marxism is also a non-believer in God. And we've seen a rise of this too in our culture, starting from the 1960s on, where they came out with a plan that I've laid out on my channel before by Cleon Skousen, who identified this plan in his book Against Naked Communists. But I think we're seeing strands of communism on the Democratic Party, and I think that's a huge turnoff to a lot of people. We kind of highlighting that, but like with Pine Creek Doug, a lot of just normal, regular, everyday Americans.
Right. Well, Pine Creek Doug said he actually makes some good points along these lines. He said something like he started noticing that he agreed with the Christians more and liked them more when he was trying. He didn't think they were right about God, but he agreed with where they stood in relationship to society, or something like that, which makes sense. The intuitions about how a society should be run. He was agreeing more with Christians, like he's, conservative. And I think his wife is Christian, so that helps. Pretty sure his wife is Christian.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think Sentinel says something valid here too. Most atheists have a disappointing father. There's a lot of people, when you ask them what happened, a lot of them, they don't get along with their father or their mother, or they had a bad experience in the church. And they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, instead of maybe going to a different denomination or a different church.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Josh?
I just wanted to mention, I think he's referring to a book by Paul Vitz. I forgot what it's called. But it talks about how atheists have had bad relationships with their father. And he chronicles all the atheists throughout history, like Voltaire and so forth, and just a number of different thinkers, atheist thinkers, Holbrook, different thinkers that have had really bad, crummy relationships with their fathers, and they project their dissatisfaction with their father, with their earthly father, on their heavenly father. So it's from the psychologist Paul Vitz. And you can find it on Amazon. It's a really great read. I've brought it up in many of my debates and with atheists. So I recommend that to anyone.
I also recommend. I think people need to realize the power of prayer, and so I think that we need to pray for these atheists, that God opens their eyes. And I actually do. I pray quite frequently for the atheists in a Bible study that I go to and at church. And so every time I go, I pray for the atheists that God opens their eyes, including agnostics in my own family. And so it's a process, but it does work. God takes those prayers and he uses them.
Absolutely. And I think that's what any of us Christians should be doing. We should pray for them, but we should not compromise on the gospel of Jesus Christ. We should speak truth to what they are saying without fear. If you fall down, if you do something wrong or say something wrong, You need to get back up and then and do your best and continue to talk truth. So I think we Christians always need to pray for those.
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the good sign is, right, it seems to be not being politically weaponized to the same extent, but atheism is always a question of will, or almost always, 99.9% of the time, a question of will rather than intellect, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the way you have to approach it. And Hitchens and the other horsemen made it very clear that it was a question of will rather than intellect.
Yeah. Craig?
I was just thinking because where did a lot of these people go? I mean, it's actually somewhat
Blue
amazing
sky.
because I remember actually a lot of them did go there, didn't they? Because I remember commenting something like 3 or 4 years ago to Pine Creek Doug, and he took issue with this, that like atheists are disappearing, because even back then, like Skylar Fiction stopped streaming, Cyrus the Skeptic, I don't know if you guys even remember him, he started switching to like leftist politics, and it just seemed like people were stopping, like people were quitting, Owen something or other. There was this one girl who was on the Atheist Experience who I actually liked, I forget what her name was, and she made this announcement that she wasn't going to do it anymore. And I made that comment to Pine Creek, and he's like, no, it's not happening. And then all of a sudden he's it's like there are about 4 or 5 new atheist channels that I watch. And other than that, there used to be about 25 that were, combative atheist types, and they're gone. Their YouTube channels are gone. I mean, yeah, they probably on Blue Sky, and they're probably all left, like doing lefty politics, I guess. But they're not doing atheist content anymore. Even I think Prophet Azad made an announcement that he's going to do like, I guess, more political, anti-Trump stuff or something.
But let me tell you where they went. They've actually gotten jobs because I think we collectively we've helped them out of their cult, their new atheist cult that says the only thing that exists is what can be scientifically verified. We've got them out of that cult, out of that mindset. So they've started reflecting. So the growth of apologetics coincides with the downfall of new atheism and really of atheism as a whole. Atheism was way more popular at the first and middle of the 20th century. Since then, it has been drastically going down, except for a short blimp in the timeline of new atheists. But that's evaporated. And it's because of the rise of Christian apologetics, the rise of thinkers like, or the reawakening of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas or C.S. Lewis, or, there's a number of them, Francis Schaeffer, Tolkien. There's so many of them. Once you start reflecting on these arguments for Christianity and reflecting on the vacuousness of the arguments for atheism, then they walk away. And I think it's
well, that might have something that might have a lot to do with it, because I pointed out on my channel a bunch of times that like the space has been in a stalemate for years, where like when Stephen and I first started doing this, I remember I'd see a Christian get killed by an atheist once or twice a week, like a debate where the Christian, and usually, I mean, it was always fundamentalist, but still, you were seeing it constantly, and you don't see it anymore. Like they freak out if they think there's like there was that one time where William Lane Craig said this thing that they all thought was stupid, and everyone and their sister made a video about it, and it was like that was like about 1.5 years ago at this point, because that was like the first taste of victory in a long time. Like there was that one debate with Alex J. O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza. That was like one of those debates of old where Dinesh D'Souza didn't know the Bible at all. And he just wound up like he kind of got smoked. But like that used to happen every day. It doesn't happen anymore, So that has a lot to do with it. They're just not gaining ground. And there's no argument to gain ground with. Saying ducking an argument by saying you're the one making the positive claim, Craig, you have the burden of proof. That's all well and good, but that's not an argument. And if you had a really good argument, believe me, you would present it. If you had a really slam dunk argument that said, here's why God does not exist, you'd present it. There isn't one. It's not there. And it's not because God isn't falsifiable because it's not falsifiable. It's possibly because God isn't falsifiable because it isn't, it isn't false. That's why it's not falsifiable.
Mhm.
Because there are arguments to falsify God. The natural problem of evil is an argument attempting to falsify what ostensibly isn't falsifiable. So it is falsifiable in those terms. And you can prove a negative. That's something they've been asserting for years, which is not true. It's just that there isn't an argument. There is no real justification. If I ask a person, why are you an atheist? They can tell me why they're not a fundamentalist Christian. They can tell me why the earth isn't 6,000 years old or why they don't think there's good evidence for the resurrection, but they can't tell me why they don't believe in God, why God does not exist, because there isn't an argument. And that ultimately is probably going to play on them. That tends to erode confidence because the entire premise of a good justification is if you have a solid, and this is atheists who say this, that would, if you your confidence should be equivalent to the evidence presented. So your confidence should match the evidence level. So if you have no justification for the proposition God does not exist, you shouldn't hold it too closely. You should, if you have no real reason to think that, no real justification for thinking that, then you should weaken your confidence that it's true. You might say, which a lot of them say, which I'm fine with, no one has presented me like the Kalam argument doesn't work, or no one's presented me with an argument that works. I'm fine with that. But that's not really, really strongly believing that God does not exist. That's a different thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Well,
Stefan. Go.
if I could, I've been studying this argument, or I mean the argument for Christianity and atheism since about 1997, 1998. And I've read lots of books. I've been watching on how they argue. I don't think there's a substantial difference between the new atheist arguments and the old atheist arguments. I don't think that there's any good arguments, at least that the arguments that they have presented. I don't think there's any good arguments that haven't been thoroughly critiqued or debunked. So I hear a lot of the same arguments, just in different rhetorical fashion. But yeah, I don't think that there's any good reason to be an atheist today. Not with the wealth of knowledge that we have today.
It's true. I wanted to comment on two things. One is I agree with all of you that definitely there are no good arguments that God doesn't exist. The best one they have is the problem of evil, saying if there's a good God, why would he allow evil in the world? But
right.
The answer to that is
like, that's a God behavior, not necessarily ontology.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Why would God allow this? Not, God therefore doesn't exist is not organically, automatically the logical conclusion of that. It's just why would he allow this?
But let me answer this prayer study thing here. I anarchist, because I looked into this study a while ago. What happened was there were hospital patients, and they had a group of Christians from afar who didn't know these hospital patients praying for a particular group of the hospital patients and not praying for another group of hospital patients. But the major flaw in that study is nobody's controlling for the prayers of the loved ones of all of those hospispital patients.
Well,
they didn't
so
find
many flaws in
differences.
There's so many flaws in that study. I went to church I go to church with 200 Christians every Sunday, let's say. There's about 5 of them who I think have an active prayer life that I would actually be impressed with, that I would put in a study like that. You can't just randomly call Christians because most of them don't know how to pray. Ask them about their prayer life and have they ever felt like they've heard from God? And a lot of them will say no. So you're going to put them in a study? It's ridiculous. You got to get people who are like prayer warriors who have testimony. There are people at my church who say when they pray that there's XYZ happened and XYZ happened. Those are the people who would have to be in the study. People who actually think that their prayers are heard, and you can't just randomly call Christians and do a study because most Christians just aren't that, don't know what they're doing. It's just ridiculous. You wouldn't do that with like the general population to see how much they know about XYZ PDQ, you go to the educated class first or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You do some preliminary studies to make sure you're getting a control group that actually fits the criteria. And there's nothing about that control group. It's just random Christians. I wouldn't go to a random Christian to have them pray. I used to like walk away from people at prayer groups because they freak me out. So they'd start like, say weirdo like deliverance prayers. I'd run away from them. Like, this person doesn't know what they're doing. And that's the person in the control group. Okay, great. That person's not going to make God show up. It's just, you can't be ignorant of Christianity and do a good study on prayer. You can't. You have to be somewhat of an insider to Christianity in order to get the right people for the study. That's step one, at
We
least. So
just
those
lost
studies are all
Andrew.
ridiculous.
I want to say
Is he like, what?
we just lost Andrew for a second. I want to say hi to people in the chat though, because I want to make sure that there are. We're not saying there's no atheists out there. We know there's atheists out there. We have some in the chat. So
Yeah, of course.
I want to welcome all of you to the conversation here. I've got the Sentinels in here, Blaster Master. I can't tell what this word is. Mert on YouTube, something like that. Blaster Master is a blast from the past, actually, because he's been in here. Alexis Corral, Nikki. Nikki has an amazing story of her own conversion from being a secular Jew, atheist, and her parents. Apparently, her dad also converted in the last weeks of his life. So that's really fantastic. And
Wow.
so we got some good stuff. Nikki had a miracle cure, and brought her back. And so that's really great. And good to see Anarchist. Good to see all of you here. Feel free to say what you want, but just be kind to one another in the chat. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Yeah, there'll still be atheists. I mean, as I always say, the philosophical atheists will be the last ones standing at the end of the day, because their brand will continue on forever, as far as I can tell, because they're just interested in philosophy and religion, and they don't believe in God, and there are always going to be people like that,
I
But
think
the period. Let me just finish the thought. The period where atheism was starting to break through to the mainstream, and you'd see it at the bookstore and stuff. That's gone. That's over. It's gone. It's vanished. Go ahead.
I think with the increase of Christian apologetics, or the regrowth of Christian apologetics, I think the really hardcore philosophical atheists will be more and more marginalized. There will be fewer philosophical atheists at this point. I think there will be more provincial theists around, people who say that, well, we live as if Christianity is true through our traditions, through the practical wisdom, through our language, through the substructure of our society. But we aren't certain about a few things, about the miracles. But we can't say that atheism is true. I think atheism will become more of a marginalized group. That's just my opinion. I do think there are other types of arguments, and you just brought up one, prayer. I do think that's actually a good argument. I think prayer, I've brought this up before, but I think prayer actually helped in my situation. I was re-looking at the official medical records of when I had a severe head injury, and I had a grade 5 severe head injury, where it's very, very improbable that you live. There were so many parts of my brain that were showing that could have killed me. So many things happen, and it's really a miraculous thing that I recovered, not just lived, but that I recovered, was able to graduate high school and then college and then graduate school, all with a 4.0 GPA. And so I do think prayer is a legitimate argument. And I think there are other types of arguments as well that show atheism is going to be more of a lesser movement in the future.
Well, I'm relatively certain you could do an empirical study if you correlated it correctly, that would show some evidentiary justification for the power of prayer. I'm relatively certain because I've seen the power of prayer in my own life. Really straightforward. And I used to say this in videos all the time. I haven't said it in a long time, but like, I can tell you, my wife. I tried to explain this to Matt Dillahunty, and he's like, "You have no epistemic justification for what your wife believes." My wife can tell me what she thinks, and I can listen to her, and I can agree. But like, my wife could be at a prayer meeting and tell me there's no presence of God here, and I would have been at the same prayer meeting like 2 hours before her, and have decided the same thing independent of her. Matter of fact, that's happened a lot, where we independent of each other decided the exact same thing about whether there's a presence to be had at a meeting or something like that. So I don't know if that was clear how I said it, but like, it happens a lot with people who know what they're doing, where I could say, no, don't bother with them. There's nothing going on there. And my wife would have the exact same conclusion, completely independent of me, without having consulted me. So there's a way, if somebody understood it, how you could like demonstrate empirically, because like when I go to church, you see the time where it's not like a bell goes off and everybody goes, okay, now let's all pretend like we believe in God. People start automatically, of their own accord, responding to the presence in the room, and you see the difference in the behavior of the people. They're not faking that. That's automatically what happens. You could easily do an empirical study on that, but you have to know what you're looking for. I don't know if you could do it as a committed skeptic, because I doubt it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for. Let me tell you something real quick. There, do you remember the guy called Alicia Ben Abuya on Twitter, on X? You guys remember?
Sounds vaguely familiar.
He's
vaguely familiar. Sound like
years ago. I've been interacting with him since like 2016, and many years ago there was another guy who said this Alicia is the smartest guy I know. And so Alicia always had all these comments, and he's a secular Jew who lives in Israel. And so all of a sudden lately we start following each other, and I asked him on X publicly if he would mind if I prayed for him, and he said he wouldn't mind if I prayed for him. So I started praying for him. So you'll never know. You won't know till you get to heaven, but who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of connections that we'll only find out in heaven. It will only be unbelievable how many things that what we do here on earth have a connection that help another person see or be more open to the gospel. We aren't in a position to flatly say that that's not possible. I certainly think it is possible that God puts certain people in certain places at certain times where they speak the truth, or they use an argument for God, or a night, or they say something with honesty, and it opens up a pathway where someone starts, I don't know, questioning their atheism, or looking at their atheism or their viewpoint from a different perspective. And that leads them eventually to Christ, or maybe it leads their family to Christ. So I think we really need to, and I'm speaking to myself also, we really need to take evangelism seriously, because it can have really profound impact on history and our modern times.
Yeah. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens too. There was that dude, I don't even remember who that was, but he was very combative, new atheist style atheist. I got into a couple of tiffs with him on Twitter, and one day he turned around and he was like, he said he'd gone back to the Lord, and I forget who it was though. He was like one of the few people who like confronted me for no reason. Like I was posting something about, something random, like posting this guy's going to be on my channel type thing. And he showed up and started a tiff with me. I don't exactly remember his name, but one day he turned around and he was like, I'm a Christian again. So yeah, who knows who they say plant seeds, and who knows what seeds take root, and what thing is going to make the difference with the person and what's not, who knows what pushed me to actually start exploring it and taking it more seriously. You know, what was the initial catalyst? I'm not sure. Could have been my cousin from, you know, there was a time when I was in Italy with my cousin from Massachusetts, who was like a really devout Catholic, and I got along with her really well. Really liked my cousin, you know, and that made a big impression on me. Maybe that was it. You know, once I got past, I did the same thing that atheists did. Like I started browbeating her when we would sit up late at night drinking and having conversations in Italy. And I started out like, you know, you guys hate gays, and I started like, you know, doing basically counter apologetics on her. And then once I got past it, though, she started telling me stuff about, you know, the Lord and things like that. And I remember thinking at the time, like, there's something to this, because there was just something about her that was so grounded, and like, you know, maybe that was it. Maybe that was the seed right there. Don't know. It could easily be.
Yeah, it definitely could be. You know, I'm noticing we're coming up on an hour. I wanted to see maybe like 5-10 more minutes. And if you guys wanted to make some closing comments and that sort of thing. I think we answered the question. Atheist has been destroyed. New atheism has been destroyed, I should say, but we still have atheists out there, even some in the channel.
Yeah, we can do like 5 or 10 minutes and then like wrap it all up. I think it's been destroyed for a while. I think as long as we keep speaking truth, keep doing apologetics, philosophy, arguing back, speaking truth to their ideologies, to their rhetoric, I think it will remain dead. So I think we should just keep on keeping on.
Sounds good. Craig, what do you think?
What exactly am I addressing? Has it been
Just
destroyed, or
anything
what's the
that you
question?
might, well, we don't have too much more time. So anything that you might still want to talk about on this kind of topic that maybe we haven't talked about or anything like that.
Well, the one thing that I mentioned that I've already mentioned, but I'll mention it again because I think it's central, is that the original premise of the new atheist was that Christianity was irrational nonsense for idiots. And like that has been thoroughly debunked. You know, they don't even do, it's very rare that you see an argument like what's better for society, Christianity or atheism. You see them every once in a while. You used to see them like every 3 days, there'd be a debate like that. And, you know, the evidence is what the evidence shows. And it's just, you know, whether you believe in God or not, it's really easy to demonstrate that it's better for people to be of a faith. It's better for them psychologically. It's better for them motivated in life. It's overall better for society. It's really easy to demonstrate that. The only time I ever saw Matt Dillahunty get completely annihilated was Inspiring Philosophy on those grounds. You know, it was a debate about what's better for society, religion, Christianity, or atheism, and Inspiring Philosophy brought all the evidence, and Matt Dillahunty was left kind of like, you know, with this just a bag of rhetoric that didn't add up. So once you start looking at the facts, you know, there's a couple of empirical studies that show, like, there's a couple that Aaron Robb points to, like Christianity makes people more, you know, a little bit more bigoted or a little bit more of an insider mentality or in-group mentality, something like that. There's like 1 or 2 studies that show Christianity is has some negative outcomes. But overall, there's like almost 100, hundreds of others that show the opposite. So that was a huge part of the central premise of New Atheism, that Christianity was irrational nonsense for idiots. That was really destructive, and that's just obviously not true. It's not even a supportable premise. So that you know, that had a lot to do with it. And then it's also trends. You know, punk rock is over too. You know, things trend out for a while and then it disappears, and who knows why. Punk rock is still influential. You know, the hippie movement died out in the late 60s. It's lived on in the Grateful Dead, but you know, kind of like the new atheist thing just sort of stopped. People just, you know, they trended away from it. Wokesters, people started becoming like, you know, trans rights activists and things like that. That started becoming a huge trend, and a lot of those people went from atheism to trans right activism.
That's exactly what happened to Matt Dillahunty. It's all of a sudden he's doing all that kind of stuff. He's dating this person that's identifying as a female, and then he went and debated Andrew that Andrew guy, whatever his last name
Andrew
is.
Wilson.
Right. Andrew
Yes,
Wilson. Yeah.
Andrew Wilson absolutely clobbered him in that debate. It was crazy. If anyone hasn't seen that, that is the debate of the year. It's
Well, he
Well,
left. He
yeah.
wouldn't debate him. He ran away.
rage quit.
He did leave. Yeah, that happens when people, when atheists, they're dissatisfied with the moral demands that Christianity places on them. So they use that as a camouflage for saying why they're dissatisfied with religion or with Christianity in particular. And oftentimes it's more about the ethical and moral demands that Christianity places on a person. So, I don't think there are really any intellectual grounds to be an atheist. I think we've shown that to be true. So.
Yeah, so let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. I want to know what you guys are working on. If you want to share anything, I'm going to put all of your channels. Andrew had to get out of here, but I'm going to put all 3 of your channels, links to it in my description. I don't think I have yet, but I will definitely do that. So you guys make sure you go and subscribe to their channels. And Josh, we'll start with you. What are you working on now?
Well, I just got back into education. As you can see, I'm kind of professional looking right now. I'm really happy to do that. I'm studying. I'm about to publish my first book that it should be out next year. I've been working on this for quite some time. I think at least from 2013. It's going to be pretty extensive. I've been working on that. I've been working on other things. I'm just glad to be here, and I'm glad to be among friends.
Thank you. Hey, Craig, how about you?
I'm working on, it's very related to that debate with Andrew and like I've got a video coming out on Andrew and made by Jim Bob, where they debated a secular humanist. And a premise that I've been saying for a while on my channel is that there are debates coming down the pike that heavily favor the theist. And secular humanism is a huge one because it's literally almost impossible to justify as an atheist because there's really no, they clocked this guy. Both of them debated the same guy, and I got an analysis of both of them coming out. And there's even Matt Dillahunty, there's no justification for secular humanism because the central premise of most atheist epistemology is empiricism, and that's about it. And when he was talking about why he's a secular humanist, his main premise was, it's the morals of secular human, the values of secular humanism are superior to atheism or superior to Christianity because, we can look at the empirical facts and we don't have to judge by this 2,000-year-old book. But the empirical facts, which this came up with, I don't know if you guys watched the Jay Dyer, Danny thing that was on Piers Morgan, but I was thinking of analyzing that because there was a little side part about the Izot dilemma. And I was on Nathan's channel and I started trying to explain to them what Jay Dyer meant by putting the Izot dilemma. And they all started acting like I was speaking Chinese. Like basically the problem with an atheist, you can be a moral subjectivist, but you cannot derive an ought from an is. And that's, it's only a challenge for a materialist, but most atheists are usually materialists or empiricists. And you cannot justify secular humanism on those grounds because of that reason. Because you can't, secular humanism is predicated on there being universal moral oughts. Everybody ought to be able to vote. And you can't justify it as an atheist. You can't justify it as a secular person. So it actually doesn't make any sense. And there were 2 debates made by Jim Bob and Andrew Wilson. Andrew Wilson would have killed Dillahunty in that debate if he hadn't rage quit. Because he was about to say, like, I'll cede for the point of debate that God doesn't exist, fine. And we'll just talk about the better value system and how we predicate our values as theists and how you can't predicate values as an atheist / materialist. And that may have had more to do with Matt Dillahunty, quote unquote, rage quitting, because he didn't say anything all that shocking, Andrew Wilson. But that's what I'm working on. That's kind of a long story short, trying to shorten it. I might do a thing on did you saw that, Stephanie? We should do a video about that.
Yeah, I would definitely do that. We should all get together and have like frequent reviews and things like that. I definitely saw that. And I would like to do that. Yeah. So
you saw the Piers Morgan thing and.
Yes, I saw that. I've been very busy watching a lot of the debates, trying to get my hands on a lot of things like that. So, but I wanted to comment. There's people in the chat who are non-Christians, and there's people who are Protestants or anti-Catholics, and so we've got a little bit of animosity in the chat. If you guys could just be friendlier with each other, that would be wonderful. I just wanted to say to what you're saying, Craig.
Each other.
Yeah, well,
They're
kind of just saying
fight
things,
each other.
or just saying things.
Let them fight. Let them fight.
But the thing is, what you're saying though about moral prescriptions versus moral descriptions, like biologists can explain morally or a moral description. They can describe something. They can describe a value, but they can't prescribe a value. They can't find that in nature. There's no natural explanation for moral prescriptions, which we all live by.
Right, yeah. And it's also known as the fact-value distinction. It's can't derive an ought from an is another way of saying it. It's like the debate over, like I bring up in the Andrew Wilson Jim Bob debate. So think about the trans right activists. Okay, everybody knows what the empirical facts are about if you give these if you give trans surgery to kids. Everybody knows what the facts are if you give them beta blockers or whatever they're called. But the debate is over the oughts. It's not over the empirical facts. The empirical facts, both sides know, but one side says they're too young for you to participate in surgery or make those decisions. And the other side said, no, they're going to kill themselves if they don't. That's literally the debate. It's over the oughts. It has nothing to do with the empirical facts. And that's because the oughts are transcendent to the descriptive facts. That's exactly what the premise is. Yes, that's exactly the premise of of what I was going to say in my next video coming out. And it's about Andrew Wilson and Jim Bob and secular humanism, first secular humanism.
I want to tell Susan, I don't know what happened with your wrench status, but I'm definitely going to give you a wrench. I went out and tried to do it on YouTube. I just jumped into YouTube.
I took it away from her, Stephanie. She abused it. I took it away from her.
I don't know what happened, but it's gone. And so, but I want to get it back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go. I realized I was in my other Gmail account. So I need to just switch Gmail accounts, and I'll do it after I get off this. But I'm working on, here's what I want to do. I've been binge watching on this guy called Ray, what's that last name? Ray Ibrahim. He's made a ton of videos about Muslims and the Muslim history and all that kind of stuff. I need to get somebody who's an expert on Muslims in here. So if anybody knows someone I know David Wood. It'd be great, but I don't know if he'd ever. Yeah, I'd love to get any of them on my channel because I really want to talk about this stuff. And you guys, if you want to talk about it too.
You've had Inspiring Philosophy on your channel or no? Because he's pretty big on that too. I
haven't been able to get him back on my channel. So as soon as I switched over to Catholicism, a lot of Protestants don't come on my channel anymore. I asked them. I went to their conference and everything, and I couldn't get one of them, not even one, to come on my channel. So,
well, get who are the Catholics who went crazy? Get Trent Doherty.
Oh gosh, actually, oh my gosh, yeah, that
whole debate about Muslims.
That was so crazy. So you guys, I want to thank you for coming in today. I want to thank everybody for listening to this. I can smell my grandma's food downstairs, so I got to go eat some of that. So I appreciate you coming in. We'll have to do this more regularly. I would love that. We can also do it on each other's channels if you want, whatever you guys want.
All right, let's do it. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, everybody. So just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.
Amen.